So there's a very interesting article just out in the Atlantic magazine, interviews with Trump campaign manager Susie Weil and Chris LaCivita. And it says how Mr. Trump plans to win key swing states and, if I get this right, low propensity Trump supporters. Wow, I sound like I'm a campaign operative, which I am most certainly not. But joining us to talk about this, Kellyanne Conway, former counselor to President Trump, Fox News contributor, host of Here's the Deal on Fox Nation, Katie Pavlich, townhall.com editor and Fox News contributor, Ben Domenech, editor-at-large at The Spectator, and also a Fox News contributor. Ben, I finally, after all this while, I think I got your name right, Domenech. I'm very proud of myself. But I want to begin with my pal Kellyanne. Kellyanne, it's an interesting article. I know a shot was taken at some think tanks, but that was just one paragraph. But, I want to ask you about this. Mr. LaCivita and also Ms. Susie Wiles, very smart people, running Mr. Trump's campaign. They're looking for low-propensity Trump supporters. That's one point. And then they're looking for non-white voters, specifically black and Hispanic men, between the ages of 18 and 34. Kellyanne, what do you think about that? I'm not giving any trade secrets away because out there in the magazine, I just thought we could spend a moment and talk about it. Let me repeat, low propensity Trump supporters, and they're looking for non-white voters in general, but specifically black and Hispanic men between the ages of 18 and 34. And doing several things that would make sense in that basis. What do you make of that, Kellyanne? What can you tell us?
It's a smart, strategic move by the Trump campaign and its co-campaign managers, Larry, and it really is just a piece of the entire expansion of both Donald Trump's reach into core Democratic constituencies like African Americans, like Hispanic Americans, young voters, more union households, gay and lesbian households, frankly, and a lot of young people. If you look at the Pew results in the USA Today polls, even today, they show that the approval rating for Donald Trump among the groups I just mentioned has gone up, and the disapproval for Joe Biden has gone up. Now, disapproval for your opponent does not convert into votes for you. And that's what's important here. So he's got it. This is a very important time, I think, for Trump to bury Biden on policy and to convert those would-be Trump voters who have either been non-voters or reticent to vote at all, reticent to vote for Trump, or have been Biden and Obama voters. They're upset with Biden and the age. They're watching the Democratic Party cannibalize itself. I haven't even heard the word abortion in 2 weeks since the debate. They've only been talking about Joe Biden. They've been talking about his electoral impact, by the way, not his medical necessities. Shame on them. And I think now is the time for Trump to take policy to win over those voters. They will be more prosperous. The country will have stronger borders, stronger military. It will have a stronger president. We will have policing in the cities, not crime. So he can go through the list, and I think his platform is very much aligned with that. It's a smart strategy, but I think in addition, he can reach into suburban men and women. He's got these young people giving him a second look. And they're not against Joe Biden just because he's old. They're against him because he wants to ban TikTok and flavored vapes and menthol cigarettes, and his policies stink for young people.
Menthol cigarette. Katie, if you're going after, black and Hispanic men, young men, black and Hispanic men, first of all, they'd be very worried about getting a job. They'd be very worried about real wages. But Trump goes to UFC fights, which is very popular amongst that group. He puts out gold sneakers. I don't know if they have the money to afford gold sneakers, but they love their sneakers, okay? How about they like cryptocurrencies, Katie, which Trump's come out foursquare for. In fact, he's going to the cryptocurrency convention, and they're taking campaign contributions. And that crowd I don't think that crowd is a big fan of woke either. Again, I repeat, black and Hispanic men between the ages of 18 and 34. What do you make of it, Katie?
Well, I would say that the president, and I do love a good sneaker, by the way, can't go wrong with those. But the president is not doing this by pandering like you've seen from Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. He's doing it by presenting this platform and themes for the RNC convention next week that apply to everybody. You know, every group of people is tired of seeing their earnings be eaten away by inflation. People are scared of what's happening in their communities with illegal immigration and crime, and they're very worried about what's been happening on the world stage, and they're very concerned that Joe Biden's going to walk us right into World War III, especially after our adversaries and enemies saw him, emperor has no clothes style during the debate at the end of June. And so the platform they put out is actually very straightforward. It's not abrasive. It's not even really that political. And the biggest theme of all is they're saying we want to get back to common sense. And of course, everybody agrees on those issues in terms of keeping men out of women's sports, for example, for people who have children or daughters in school, the economy being the number one thing. So it's a very straightforward, moderate platform. And I think a lot of people are interested in seeing what he has to say next week.
Yeah, it's pretty smart. Right. Now it's going to be very interesting next week. Ben Domenech, here's Trump's disciplined campaign strategy is driving the left nuts. You wrote that. I picked right up on it, so we got to get Ben back on the show. Driving them nuts because of his discipline. How about that, Ben?
Well, I think there are a couple of things going on there, Larry. You know, one of the things that I've heard from Republican voters over the past several years has been some version of, I think Donald Trump is great. I support him. I just wish that sometimes he'd be more focused, get out of his way on certain things, and not be distracted by shiny objects offered up by the left. And I think that what we've seen over the last fortnight is that he really is capable of doing that now in a way that I find very impressive. I was on with Brian Kilmeade the other day right after Trump did his radio interview, and one of the things that he commented on was how so many people had told him that perhaps in his 2020 debate with Joe Biden, he should have been less aggressive and just let Joe talk. And I think that what he's been doing over the past 2 weeks has really been letting Joe talk. And to the degree to which that he has talked, he has disappointed so many voters across the country. And I'll make one other point, and I rarely invoke DEI level things, but I am the Hispanic man on this panel. So I'll just say that I think one of the big things that he's done is that Joe Biden has had the complete wrong priorities for Hispanic and black men across America. He does not care about the things that they care about. He cares about a host of things that are radical leftist agenda things that AOC and Kamala Harris and all these other progressives care about. And he's done it in a very deliberate way. And that's why he botches a question about abortion that everyone else in his party thinks he should have been able to handle as a softball. It's because he doesn't really authentically have any connection to that radical agenda, but he embraced it as a complete, sort of guilty pleasure and bargain with the devil in order to get his access to the White House. And the people who are part of this, of the key constituencies of the Democratic Party, they recognize that, and that's why they're shifting to Donald Trump, because he actually cares about the things that they care about. Yeah, no, it's very genuine, and he is very disciplined this time around. Can I get I got to do this as a lightning round. I can't leave without vice presidential pick. I need a vice presidential pick. Kellyanne Conway, lightning round, vice presidential pick. You're the smartest in the country. What do you think?
Everyone he's considering would be great. I have a preference for Marco Rubio. I think he helps unify and expand the party. The Nikki Haley donors, been in the Senate for 14 years, ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, is one of the most eloquent speakers when it comes to abortion, if not foreign policy, in our party.
All right. Katie Pavlich, what do you think? Lightning round, VP.
I don't know, but I did notice that Glenn Youngkin didn't actually answer your question about whether he talked to the president about it. So maybe that's a tell.
All right. Ben Domenech, what do you think?
I agree with both of these ladies. I think both of those guys would be fantastic picks, and I particularly like the fact that Marco Rubio represents Trump, sort of bringing the entire coalition together in a way that I think is really impressive and something that no one ever really thought he'd be able to achieve, but he has.
Yeah, Marco Rubio is, grown up, 18 to 34, grown up, all grown up. I mean, he's a pretty impressive guy. They're all impressive. They're all good. Burgum's good. I don't want to pick any sides here because I'm just, your humble news anchor. But I'm just saying they're all pretty darn good. I got other
Find out
questions.
soon.
None of them are Kamala Harris.
None of them are Kamala Harris. None of them are Joe Biden. And all of them seem to subscribe to this very growthy platform. Thank you. I have other questions. We will see you all at the convention in Minneapolis. Thanks for coming on.
Yes.
Bye. It's Katie
See you
Pavlich,
there.
Ben Domenech, and Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne's new show, Here's the Deal. It's on Fox Nation. The very first episode, well, featuring yours truly, is out right now. New episodes available every single Thursday.